From KPRC Local 2, this is Houston Newsmakers with Khambrel Marshall.
Good morning and welcome to Houston Newsmakers. This morning we have a special treat, at least I happen to think so, a visit from our good friend Congressman Kevin Brady. Congressman Brady has a lot on his plate these days as chairman of the Joint House-Senate Economic Committee, chairman of the House Ways and Means Health Subcommittee, and chairman of the Ways and Means Energy Taxes Task Force.
You did well saying that. That is not easy.
It's not easy. We have a half-hour show, so I can't get into all the other things you do. Good to see you again.
No, thanks for having me, Khambrel. I appreciate it so much.
And you guys get home for recess, and tell me what, on this particular recess, what kinds of things are on your priority list to get done while you're home?
Well, we do more than 50 town hall meetings a year, so we've held 5 of them. I think we're 6 of them in the last week or so. We're doing a lot of work on healthcare issues because leading that effort in Washington is key, obviously, to our region, Texas Medical Center and others. And then we've just taken on this new role on energy. How do we reform the tax code so that we can produce energy more affordably, more of it here at home, and be able to compete around the world? So we've been spending time in the energy sector as well here in the region.
Well, I know your background before Congress was all about business, chamber, and that sort of thing. And one of the functions you have, chairman of the Joint Economic Committee, what is that role and how effective has that committee been?
Yeah, it's an unusual role, and I think an opportune one. It is by law the counterweight to the President's Council of Economic Advisors. So in effect, we advise Congress on economic policy. And so as chairman, what I'll focus on is identifying the roadblocks that are in place right now to getting this economy going. We're going to be looking at lower taxes and what that can do, but also the Federal Reserve is playing a bigger role than it ever has in our life and in most of America's life. So we're going to be challenging some of the assumptions the Fed makes and asking on their 100th anniversary this year, what role should they play to make sure America has the strongest economy in the world for another 100 years? Because we live in a very competitive market. China's growing exponentially, Brazil, other areas as well. I think our goal ought to be, let's have another American century where our economy is the highest in the world. Joint Economic Committee helps us in that area.
When you talk about the fact you say we advise the president, that sounds to me like it's we, both Republican and Democrat, as a joint committee, which is rather refreshing, really, to hear you say we advise. How does it come out of the committee as a joint advisory? Do you agree on what you're going to advise?
Sometimes. There's common areas where we look at, for example, the way America does the taxes. We actually double tax our local companies when they compete around the world. And when we force them to leave their profits overseas instead of bringing them home and investing them here. So we've had common ground on how do we encourage those profits to come back to America. We've looked at medical device issues, innovation. How competitive are we in the world? There is common ground in those areas. We have difference of opinions on what we ought to be doing right now with the economy, but overall, it's an effective committee. Plus, we do a lot of the analysis of what is happening with our economy. What's the missing ingredient, in a strong recovery? We have one right now. How do we compare against the rest of the world? And all of that that analysis helps policymakers, both Republican and Democrat, make some informed decisions.
It sounds like that's the kind of stuff that we hear about, they talk about when laws, how they're made. It's kind of like making sausage. You don't want to know how it's done. But that sounds like it's one of those positive things.
It actually is. I'm not an economist. I'm a Chamber of Commerce executive by trade. I've worked in helping build a local community, recruit new businesses, start small businesses. So I sort of come at it from that angle. And I always like that information presented in a way that you and I can understand it, not just economists. How can average people take this and use it?
Well, I know you're familiar with all the budgets and all the kind of things. That's certainly been a topic of conversation. March 1st, that's the automatic spending cuts that are scheduled to go into place called a Sequester. And a lot of folks don't really know what that means or don't really care to know, but it really is the can has been kicked down the road. That's the way I've been analyzing it. Can's been kicked down the road about the kind of things we need to do to get our budget in place. There's an impasse between both parties. What's it going to take to get something done?
Well, the big debts we've run up as a nation and our continuing deficits each year has really become a drag on our economy. So the sooner, I think, we get our financial house in order, sooner the economy recovers. These automatic savings are the result of the president's idea a year ago, and we Republicans agreed with it, that if Congress couldn't agree on specific ways to shrink the size of government, these savings would occur on March 1st, and they will. Couple things. One, they seem like they're large, but they're pretty modest. It is equivalent of asking a 500-pound man to lose 10 pounds. Yes, they're going to complain about it, but it's just a step in the right direction. Also, our government has grown just dramatically over the last number of years with the stimulus and others. So this really just starts to trim it back to where it was before the stimulus. We started pumping a lot of money into it. So, and it exempts. One thing I think back home here in our town hall meetings, people want to know, how does this affect me? It doesn't touch Social Security or Medicaid. Important programs like children's health insurance, food stamps, welfare, veterans care, military pay, none of that is touched by that. It's really in other areas of the government.
You know, interesting, I had a chance to sit down with Senator Cornyn this week. He was in town. I had a chance to talk with him, and a chance to for a few minutes. And he said, you know, that you got $1.2 trillion over 10 years. That's a lot of money, and that means $85 billion this year. Yeah. But he said it's something that has to happen. Listen to what he said.
We can't ask senior citizens and working families to shoulder the entire burden of deficit reduction while asking nothing more from the wealthiest and the most powerful.
Sure that not having senior citizens shoulder the challenge of balancing the budget. You heard that in the State of the Union. We'll talk about Senator Cornyn in a minute. But the State of the Union address, that was just one of the things he said. That just shows the imbalance. You all agree that we need to do something about the budget. The biggest challenge is figuring out what to do.
Yeah, and obviously in these savings, Social Security is protected, Medicaid is protected, Medicare Part D, none of those are touched. So really, I'm not sure that's exactly an accurate way to look at it. What we do know is that we have a lot of wasteful spending. We have a lot of fraud in the federal government, and this is the first step in trying to identify that. It's not a big step in getting back toward a balanced budget, but pretty important because it'll finally start to shrink the size of at least part, you know, that big federal government. So it's important from that standpoint.
And a lot of people don't really get into, in terms of hearing about budgets and things like that. It's not something that grabs their attention. They should know, but they don't seem to be embracing it. Is it tough getting the people to get engaged in what needs to be done?
Well, I think they're interested, but the jargon we use, the numbers we throw at them, frankly, they aren't very revealing. Plus, you know, when we're talking trillions, that's just, I have trouble grasping, you know, numbers like that. And so part of the challenge is putting it in real terms. How does it affect my family, where I work, my small business, my parents on Medicare and Social Security? And we need to do a better job of that, by the way.
Well, I can't thank you enough for being here. We're going to have more with Congressman Brady after this break. Among other things, we'll talk about affordable health care. Is it in reach? We'll talk about that next when Houston Newsmakers continues. And welcome back. This morning we're talking with Congressman Kevin Brady about the economy, the sequester, the budget, all of that. We were talking earlier about the sequester, and we were talking about the size of the budget and why the cuts may not seem as much. And we were talking about Senator Cornyn, and I asked him the same question. He talked about how big that budget is and how much this is going to be slashed, but in the scheme of things, it really isn't that much. Let's listen to what he had to say.
And that's real money. That's a lot of money. But it's not much when you consider the size of the federal budget, which is $3.6 trillion. So this is about 2.3%, 2.4% of federal spending. So I don't believe that any of us should be like Chicken Little and say the sky is falling. We have to rein in our spending. The president advocated for and got a significant tax increase on December the 31st through the so-called fiscal cliff. But that $60 billion of additional revenue won't close that $1 trillion deficit. And those cumulative deficits result in about a $16.5 trillion debt, which threatens our economic prosperity and jobs.
That's what you said. I mean, the amount of the budget, considering how much we're cutting off, it's not that big. I guess it's the challenge is to be smart about the cuts.
It is. It is. Well, one, government's never going to say it's okay to shrink. I mean, they're always going to complain about it. These savings amounts are not huge, but they're important because they're a good first step toward, again, trying to live within our means as a nation. What we do know is, compared to what families have had to you know, cut and tighten their belts in small businesses over the last few years. Gosh, we're not doing nearly as much as they have. And it's time Washington, my belief is Washington has all the money it needs. It just doesn't have all the money it wants. It needs to learn the difference.
We have a couple of minutes left. Let's talk quickly about health care. Actually, we have 3 minutes left. We'll talk about health care. Every time I hear someone from the Republican Party speak, they always still talk about repealing Obamacare. That doesn't sound like it's going to happen. Why are we still hearing that?
Well, I think because there's just a belief it's the wrong solution.
Can't we just go and fix those parts that can be fixed and not talk about repealing everything else? It seems like that just sets us way back in terms of progress.
You know, I don't think it does from the standpoint of Republicans will continue to believe it's the wrong solution. We're going to voice that belief, but we're also going to focus on the areas of the president's new law that we think either drive up costs, encourage businesses to drop their plans. We're very worried about that. This is a crucial year. We're going to examine all the new rules and regulations in 2013 that lead to the full implementation next year are going to have a big impact on the medical center, on doctors and nurses, on businesses. And so I think this is the right year to not only seek to change the elements, both parties together, that don't work, but also make sure we understand just what the impact is on patients and others.
I happen to like you a lot. The polls say that a lot of people don't like Congress right now.
You know, I've heard that.
And you know, and it's kind of tough to hear sometimes, but how do you get people to start feeling better about what you're doing and how you're doing it?
You know, I think, one, it's always about solutions and about principles to go with it. One of the changes I've seen in Congress is we're really not bitterly partisan right now. We just have two different visions of where we want the country to go. And one thing we've lost is ask the question, where is that common ground? We know we have different visions, but are there areas to agree, like in cutting fraud out of and waste out of the government, making sure the government works for families, not against them. There actually is, I think, some common ground, but we got to look for it.
Politically, there's some who say, well, compromise is still a dirty word. I mean, especially as it relates to maybe your constituents maybe not wanting you to compromise it. That's more of a political campaign kind of thing. Yeah,
that's exactly right. And the truth of the matter is that every big challenge we've got in America, from getting our financial house in order to the economy, to saving Social Security and Medicare, both parties are going to have to work together to solve it. There is no substitute for that. So the sooner we can agree to sit down at the table and stay at the table till we solve it, the better I think our country's going to be.
You optimistic we're going to get some good things done in this Congress?
You know, I just don't know. You know, we're starting in a fairly with a fiscal cliff, and now the savings on March 1st, starting off kind of roughly. So we'll have to see.
Well, I wish you the best, obviously. Thank you for finding time on this recess, for coming in.
Oh, thanks for having me, Khambrel.
Your staff has been good about making sure that I know when recess happens, so
yes, sir.
Appreciate you coming in.
Thank you.
Thank you.